Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sarah Elfreth, the proud Congresswoman from Maryland's 3rd Congressional District. Thank you for tuning in. I'm going to invite our special guest for the day, which takes a bit of a minute, but here we go. Invite sent. Thank you all for taking the time, and it's been a crazy couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months here on Capitol Hill, and so we had changed the timing of this because it just came from a really important meeting of the Maryland delegation about federal employees, which is going to be one of the topics that we talk about here today, but just met with some of the major unions, a group called Democracy Forward, which this crowd should be familiar with since we've had them on at our last official town hall with updates on some of the court cases and filings that they have put forward in conjunction with the various federal unions and federal workers. So just had a great delegation meeting talking about that. And then as soon as we're joined by our special guest today, we'll dive into a kind of different take, a different side of what's happening in the courts right now. I'm going to try again to add our Attorney General in case that did not go through. Thank you for tuning in despite some technical difficulties. We tried a different way. Oh, there we go. More than one way. That should have worked, yet he has not popped up yet. I tried both ways, inviting him and accepting his invitation. So hold on one second, let me accept again. Try it again. I'm hitting accept, and yet it is not. It says request to join. I've hit accept. Sorry, folks. You'd think I'm a veteran at this by now. You tell them I've invited him, and I'm also going to accept his. Sometimes the technology works wonders, and sometimes it takes a minute. It says OAG Maryland is unable to join. So that's why we have the wonderful Olivia in the background, only in her 3rd week with the office, running technical interference for us. Trying again. You know, Olivia, we're not on Wi-Fi. Oh, here we go. Mr.
Hey, here we
Attorney
are.
General.
How you
Sorry
doing?
about that.
Yeah, the
I'm
technology
well.
on
How are
both
you?
ends, I think. I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine.
Good. Well, thank you for taking the time. I want to just start at the top by saying that you are a former member of Congress, so you will well appreciate that there's a vote scheduled for 6 p.m., but they might call it early. And so let's hope it doesn't get called till 6 and we can have a full conversation. But fair warning to you and everybody watching at home, if I do have to get called for a vote, I'm going to have to run across the street and do my duty. So
Totally understand. I see you're in your congressional office. I recognize the background. And first of all, hey, thanks for your service in the 3rd Congressional District. You're doing great, you and the Maryland delegation. So I'm glad to be on with you for whatever little time you may have before that vote.
I appreciate it. So I haven't even introduced you to the audience yet, but folks, I have heard from so many constituents. We're talking with thousands of constituents over the last few weeks, as have my colleagues throughout Maryland and across the country, from constituents who are concerned about some of the actions coming out of the White House, coming out of DOJ and by unelected Elon Musk. And a lot of the battles ahead, a lot of the checking and balancing is happening in our court system right now. Brief reminder to folks tuning in at home that I'm in the Democratic Party and we are in the minority in the House, 215 to the Republicans 217, which means that I can file bills, and I am happy to talk about them today, but I need 3 of my Republican colleagues to join us for any kind of congressional action, which makes our 3rd branch of government, the court system, critical right now as we are doing our due diligence, checking and balancing the executive branch. And a huge part of that check and balance comes from our wonderful attorneys general across the states. And so I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleague, my friend. We've worked together for about a decade now, a former member of Congress from the 4th Congressional District in Maryland, but now our wonderful attorney general in Maryland, Anthony Brown. So AG Brown, thank you so much for taking the time.
Look, it's great to be on. I'm glad that you are convening folks on Instagram to hear about what we're doing, certainly to share what you're doing. So thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Okay, so we're going to dive right in. I have 5 questions for you. First of all, not everybody might be familiar with your role. And so can you talk a little bit about what you're up to in Maryland, what the role of an attorney general is, and what attorneys general across this country are doing in this moment, again, to provide that critical check to the executive branch?
Sure. First of all, attorneys general across the country, we collaborate all the time. And sometimes we even do it in a bipartisan way, right? I think about like opioid enforcement. But today we're not joined by our Republican colleagues. There are about 23 Democratic AGs, and that includes Brian Schwab from the District of Columbia and 22 that are in states. And we've been collaborating, we've been coordinating, we've been planning for probably 10 months now, anticipating that if Donald Trump wins, what can we do as the chief legal officers in our state to ensure we're protecting our residents, we're protecting the interests of the state. Thanks to the General Assembly, when you were in the General Assembly in 2017, you gave the Attorney General authority to either join or bring a lawsuit against the federal government, not for any reason under the sun, but if what the federal government is doing is impairing the rights of Marylanders, whether it's health, whether it's workers' rights, whether it's the environment, that we can bring in action. So we've convened, we've brought together what we call a federal accountability unit of lawyers and non-lawyers. I'm working with 23 other attorneys general, and to date, we have filed about 6 or 7 lawsuits against essentially the Trump administration. And I'm more than happy to go into detail on any one of those. But it's important to understand that we work together as AGs so we can leverage each other's resources, our experiences, both our experiences in terms of in the different jurisdictions and circuits where we're filing our actions. And just the background, I hired 5 attorneys, 4 of them recently out of federal service. Actually, all 5 of them out of federal service, 1 out of the Department of Justice. So they know this business, they know it well, and we're going to represent Maryland and fight for Marylanders in the weeks, months, and years to come.
Yeah. So folks at home, A.G. Brown is the people's attorney. He defends the Maryland Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. We've, again, worked together when I was back in the Maryland State Senate, working on public safety issues, on environmental justice issues, a whole bunch of stuff. Really important tool that we have of filing these lawsuits and then, leaning on the courts to work out legality, constitutionality. That's our system of that check and balance. So AG Brown, you mentioned 6 or 7, we don't have time to talk about all of them. There's some actions and executive orders from the White House that are impacting Maryland more than perhaps other states, chief among them federal employees or funding freezes. Can you speak to if you were just sitting on your couch at home watching this, what are the 2 or 3 that you recommend folks at home follow along closely that you're working on?
Absolutely. I'd say probably, and I hate to say what is the most important because it depends on where you sit, but certainly a big one has to do with our action against the Trump administration when they attempted during the first week to freeze federal funding. This was federal funding across the board, everything from veterans benefits to environmental protection initiatives that are funded by the federal government, benefits to individuals, child care assistance. So we immediately went to court. We filed within the first week. We filed that action in Rhode Island. We've enjoyed some successes. We got a temporary restraining order. We're now in front of the court to get a preliminary injunction. And the orders that have come out from the court have really suggested, while they don't necessarily mean that we're going to ultimately win, it's strong language that supports our contention that the president is violating the law. The president does have a lot of authority, but he's got guardrails in which he has to operate, right? Congress has the constitutional authority. That's what you all do, to appropriate money, for all these different programs, whether it's for, as I mentioned, childcare, whether it's educational programs, public safety programs. And the president can't just withhold or suspend that funding, which is exactly what they did. So we went to court and we freed up that funding, although it seems like every other day we're back in court because we learn about another a state agency whose federal funds have been suspended. So we go to court or we send them the copy of the court order and they start flowing the federal funds once again. But that's probably one of the big ones. But you know what? Even birthright citizenship, that's a big one, right? I mean, in this country, the 14th Amendment said that if you were born in the United States, Okay, unless you're children of diplomats from another country, you are a U.S. citizen, long established law. And it's important for those who are born here, but it's also important for state government because a lot of our federal funding programs are based on citizenship in Maryland. So we filed that lawsuit. That was the day after inauguration. We filed 2 lawsuits in that case, and we're getting some pretty good orders as preliminary injunctions preventing the federal government from enforcing that ridiculous executive order by President Trump.
Now, I appreciate it. I did not go to law school. I have a master's in public policy. Can you break down, just for the folks at home, the what a preliminary injunction means in terms of either of these cases?
So what happens is, so we file these actions, and ultimately what we want the court to do, and it could be after a trial, to declare that the president is wrong. He operated either outside the bounds of statute or the Constitution, and we win. But along the way, we ask for relief. We say, hey, judge, there's a lot of harm that could come to Maryland and the other states. So we want you to issue an order right now telling the president to stop doing what he's doing. And it's either a temporary restraining order that lasts 14 days, you can get a 14-day extension, or a preliminary injunction, which typically lasts during the course of the litigation until you get a final judgment. So we've been successful, but it's not that every time you get a temporary restraining order or a preliminary injunction, you're going to win the case. But I can tell you right now, we're winning.
Right. And there are other issues involved, like standing and things like that. But really important that, a lot of these actions are just downright cruel. That doesn't necessarily mean they're illegal or unconstitutional, but the ones that are, especially you mentioned the funding freeze, and I've said this a number of times on these lives, but we believe, it's our position, I believe it's yours as well, that this funding freeze violates the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. So it violates a current law and the Constitution because, as you mentioned, it's Article 1, Congress has the power over the purse. These were bipartisanly passed projects, funding appropriated by Congress, at the president is freezing. And so really strong legal ground that case is standing on in particular. And again, we get some comments in here about what happens to the rebuilding of the Key Bridge that was funded, again, bipartisanly in last year's budget. A lot of this stuff is up in the air, folks, and that's why our system with this extra check and balance, the third branch, is so critically important. Mr. Attorney General, you're also a Marylander. You've represented people for a long time. What kind of impact, we talk about these issues from the 30,000-foot perspective, legal numbers, what kind of impact do some of these actions have on everyday Marylanders and, frankly, everyday Americans?
Well, it has real impact. And if we don't stop the president, and I'm going to highlight another case that we filed against the president, the administration, and DOJ, right? This so-called, Department of Government Efficiency. And if you look at what they're doing, it's chaotic, it's inefficient, and it's unlawful. And as you mentioned, it's cruel. Just this past weekend, Elon Musk sent out an email to all federal workers demanding that they send an email stating the 5 things that they did last week. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of emails. Okay, I don't know who's going to read them, but if you collect that much information, that's a real risk. It's a risk for our country. It's a risk for that department. It's a risk for individuals that are sending that information. But we brought this action against Elon Musk and the president, saying that Elon Musk has been commandeering government, particularly the central payment system of the Treasury Department, where Maryland as a state, we receive $11 billion a year through that system to the state. And Marylanders, that's each and every one of us around our kitchen table, are receiving about, in the aggregate, $51 billion a year. So you have Elon Musk and his team in that system looking at your personal information. Okay, they're not vetted. We don't know what they're doing with that information. They're potentially could delay or suspend or completely cancel payments either to the state or to individuals, like IRS payments, like Social Security payments, like food stamp payments, and the like. So we got an order from the judge to suspend that action on the part of Elon Musk. And had we not been successful, the fear is that many, many Marylanders would have seen all sorts of federal payments for different reasons, benefits and whether it's scholarship dollars that would have been suspended. because of Elon Musk, not even appointed and confirmed by the U.S. Senate, operating as a senior official in the administration.
Right. And I thank you for bringing up the email this weekend. I first heard about it on Saturday night on a way to a community event. Constituents calling me confused, scared. What happens if I don't answer this email? And for folks watching at home, the recent update is that a number of secretaries, Trump appointed secretaries, pushed back, and OPM, Office of Personnel Management, just announced that responding to that email is voluntary. And to your point, Mr. Attorney General, for my constituents who say work at Fort Meade, responding to that email would be a very real national security threat. And so it just goes to show, I think, the arbitrary nature and the scattershot strategy, if you can call it a strategy, coming out of DOJ. And like that is causing a great deal of confusion and anxiety for federal workers, I know many of whom are watching right now.
This is the gang that couldn't shoot straight, and they're issuing, the president's issuing all these executive orders. People that work for him don't understand the orders. They're being applied inconsistently, and that's why we continue to go back to court and say, hey, look, Your Honor, okay, you issued an order saying X, and they're doing Y. Now, sometimes we are able to send, correspondence to Department of Justice lawyers. They help clarify, because I'm not casting any aspersions on the attorneys at DOJ. They're professionals. They're just doing their job. But it's the administration that is operating, or at least attempting to operate, outside the bounds of the law.
Right. Got a couple. I'm trying my best to read comments as they come in, but it's a small scroll. So forgive me if I miss your question or comment. But I've seen a couple trends about questions about data, and like that is to me one of the most alarming pieces of DOJ's strategy, if you can call it that, is the access to Treasury, the access to Social Security, the access to a lot of our personal information. So Congress is, Democrats in Congress, caveat, have filed legislation. I've co-sponsored it to protect that data, but again, we can't even call that bill for a hearing. We can't bring that bill to the floor. We can't pass that bill without 3 of our Republican colleagues also standing up for their constituents and joining us. And so again, that's why we're having this conversation, because in the minority, one of the tools that we have is working in hand with our attorneys general, with groups like Democracy Forward, who are filing these pieces of these court actions, and then we in Congress can help elevate them. We can talk to our constituents about them. In certain circumstances, we can and are filing amicus briefs as well to support this work. And I just got word, literally walking into the office from the delegation meeting, that the first amicus brief is available for members to sign on. And so I'm so thrilled that we are jumping in this fight with you in the courts. Fun fact, and I didn't know if you know this or didn't know this when you entered Congress, Mr. AG, but when you're being a lawyer, you might have. Congress can't sue unless the speaker approves it. We don't have standing. I, as an individual, can't sue on behalf of Congress unless Speaker Johnson, in this case a Republican, approves that standing. So got a lot of questions about why I'm not personally suing. That's the reason right there.
And let me point this out, since we're talking about lawsuits, and I do invite your viewers, to go to Civil Rights Litigation Clearinghouse. If you Google that, it's a nice website, and you'll see that there have been about 95 actions filed against the Trump administration to date. Now, I mentioned 6 or 7 that 8 attorneys general involved in, but you have a lot of civil society organizations, ACLU, Democracy Forward, you mentioned them, Sarah, labor unions, also individual families. Like in Maryland, we have families of transgender Marylanders, where the Trump administration threatened healthcare providers who provide gender-affirming care to withhold their funding, also threatening to take criminal action against those providers. An action was filed in Maryland, not by the Attorney General, although we are going to join, not technically join, but be a part of it as an amicus brief. But there are 90 plus actions filed. You can track all of those actions. And you mentioned standing, Sarah. Sometimes the Attorney General don't have standing. We're not necessarily the best party to bring an action. And in that case in Maryland, you had families are being hurt, right? Because their children who are seeking gender-affirming care, the Trump administration would deny their existence, deny them care. And that's certainly in the category of cruel. There's no doubt about that.
So I got a question about links. We're gonna include all the links when we repost this on all platforms. We will include all the links that we talked about today, including our resource guide for federal employees who were terminated we just came from a delegation meeting, Mr. AG. We talked about the arbitrary firing of probationary employees. We're talking about folks who just got a promotion and their clock restarted on their probationary status. Folks who are mid-career and wanted to enter public service who were just arbitrarily fired over the weekend. With folks, we talk about cruel. They didn't get 2 weeks notice. Like, they were fired, their work emails were shut off, they don't get severance. These are people with roofs over their, mortgages to pay and kids in school and all of that. So lots to talk about. I got a question about a town hall. So we're doing a lot of these virtual town halls because I am in Washington very often, but we actually just scheduled our first in-person town hall, hold March 11th, folks, in Columbia with our partners, County Executive Calvin Ball and our U.S. senators. So we will be doing our in-person town hall on March 11th. And then lastly, I keep getting questions about which Republicans I'm working with. I've been in Congress now 54 days. And so mostly working with my fellow freshmen who I've spent more time with than veterans in Congress. So having those one-on-one conversations with folks and folks, Republicans who represent districts that look like mine as well, and trying to find that common ground, that commonality about how the mutual interests of our constituents are shared and impacted here. So tried to answer as many questions in rapid form. Mr. AG, my last question for you, and then we can continue to riff because this is fun and the vote hasn't been called yet. A lot of constituents are asking what they can do to fight against policies that are affecting them and their families, and what course of action might my constituents or all Marylanders have here.
Right. So I would say certainly contact your member of Congress, but if you're watching, you already are, and you're engaged, and you also know that Sarah Elfreth is doing the right thing on Capitol Hill, working with her colleagues or like-minded colleagues on your behalf. But it is being engaged, and whether that's writing something for your neighborhood newsletter, or quite frankly, writing a letter to the editor for the Washington Post, whether you're blogging, whether you're on a podcast, or if you have the opportunity to be on MSNBC, like I know members of Congress from time to time do. But it's using your voice, drumbeating your concerns, your stories, so that policymakers listen. In Maryland, we've got the good fortune of most of our congressional delegation is on board with challenging, taking on the Trump administration when they're trampling the rights and the interests of Marylanders. So we've got a great, strong Maryland delegation. Outside of Maryland, I'll be honest with you. Writing a letter to a Republican member in Texas, they're not going to read your letter. It doesn't work that way. But it's finding those opportunities to speak, those forums in which to speak. It's showing up on the Washington Mall when there are opportunities around certain issues to voice your concern in peaceful demonstration and rallies. So those are the kind of things that you can do.
Right. Exactly. And I try to mention this every time I'm on, but I'm ethically barred from saying certain things in my official capacity. And so I'm going to share what I can because of those ethics rules that you were very familiar with, Mr. AG. But I'll give folks a scenario that, in a few minutes, I'm going to go to the floor and vote on the Republicans' budget proposal that includes a cut, an $880 billion cut to Medicaid. We're talking about 664,000 Marylanders, seniors, children, new mothers who rely on Medicaid for their health care. The last time that the House Republicans tried to cut Medicaid was 2017. And people got angry, and people started showing up at their members, if they disagreed with their members, at their offices, called their lines. The really important piece here is that I'm fighting for you every single day. So are many members of the Maryland delegation. We need to keep hearing from you, but we also need you to talk to your cousins, your family, your friends who might live in a community that doesn't look like yours or share political beliefs that are different than yours, and start having those conversations again, and start asking people to participate and lean in, because representative government only works if it's representative. And so having those conversations with people who don't live in this district but might live in other districts that are represented by people who aren't me is always a helpful thing to do. So, and with that, Actually, my vote was delayed, so thank you, Olivia. Mr. AG, do you have any, and thank you, I will be, till somebody, I can't pronounce your name, I will be voting no on the budget proposal for the very reason I just mentioned. Seniors, 61% of seniors who are in some type of senior care facility, be that nursing home or retirement home, 61% of seniors rely on Medicaid for their health care. This is not, you know, a remote issue. 1 in 3 Americans rely on Medicaid for their health care, and that is why I'll be voting no. But Mr. Attorney General, to get us back from Medicaid, which I'm sure is going to be on your plate at some point as you continue your important work representing Marylanders in the court system, any closing remarks for our audience here today?
Well, I do want to invite the audience to visit the Maryland Attorney General website. We do have some resources. It's under Standing for Maryland, and we have resources particularly for the LGBTQ community, for the immigrant community. We have guidelines in terms of what to expect in terms of law enforcement and immigration law, in terms of what to expect at hospitals. And also we link to the superintendent of schools, the guidance that they've put out in terms of what to expect. And a lot of that is in the context of immigration law enforcement. I do want to point out that as the Attorney General, my role is to advise my clients on what state and federal laws require when it comes to immigration. Immigration enforcement is important, and it is a federal responsibility. Local law enforcement spends a lot of time, rightfully so, focusing on the most violent offenders in our community to keep our streets, our neighborhoods safe. And that's true whether a violent offender is an immigrant or whether they've been in this country for 50 years, whether you're documented or undocumented. Local law enforcement focuses on that activity that is harmful to our community. So I put out some guidance on that, and I invite you to our website to take a look at what we put out.
I appreciate that. Again, we're going to include all links, including our resource guide that we're going to add to today. We just got some great direction for federal employees who were impacted by the probationary firings or anything else. We're going to update our resource guide with that information we just received today. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Mr. Attorney General, I so appreciate our friendship and our partnership, and I appreciate you fighting on behalf of all Marylanders. Thank you very much.
Congresswoman Elfreth, thank you. Keep up the good work on Capitol Hill.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, everybody.